Good morning. Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden. I'm very happy this morning. I hope you're up at 8 o'clock on this beautiful sunny day in Ottawa. I hope it's sunny in your neighborhood too. I've got my special guest, Sam Cooper of the Bureau. This is an investigative reporter, and we need more people like Sam Cooper doing the news. When we come back, we're going to be discussing a CBSA whistleblower who says gangs are letting terrorists into Canada. And we'll revisit that story about the 12 MPs cited in that report last June. We'll be right back.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Please like this station right now if you can, so we can beat the YouTube censorship. You know, this is one of the subjects YouTube doesn't want to talk about, but we're doing it anyway. And we can also beat Trudeau's censorship, which we are all concerned about with the Online Harms Act. I mention the Online Harms Act every day because it's coming back for second reading in September or October, and we have got to fight this. Anybody who loves free speech needs to fight this bill, and we need to stop this bill from becoming law. So, Sam Cooper, you are an award-winning journalist from Global News, National Post. You're doing things on Substack, the Bureau. It will be in the it is in the description. Have a look at what this is doing on Substack. A lot of us are on Substack because we can't get things printed otherwise. Just before we get into this lead story here, which I read, and I just find it fascinating. This is CBSA, this is, of course, the border security in the U.S. So this is a truly not a transnational story, but it's about transnational gangs that are actually aiding and abetting terrorists, not just getting into the U.S. We hear that all the time from Republicans about how the open border policies of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have led to terrorists just walking across the border. They get some of them. A large number are just walking through. But of course, we think they don't want to get into Canada, do they? But I found the story fascinating. Maybe we can just start talking about this, Sam. I really how did you first clue into this, and how did the CBSA whistleblower get in touch with you?
Well, my mandate for the Bureau, starting up that investigative platform, being almost in 20 years with mainstream media in Canada, was to give a more fulsome platform to whistleblowers internationally, of course, focused on Canada, for national security issues and corruption issues. Because especially in Canada, the evidence is that we lack the whistleblower protections that other great nations have. And so the argument that the Bureau makes is that our bureaucrats that are coming out and trying to talk to Canadians about issues like ArriveCan, procurement scandals, they're talking to reporters like myself that are digging for the truth about deep corruption concerns in Canada's government. And I have for years been reporting, including in my book, Willful Blindness, about concerns that especially Chinese transnational gangs have been infiltrating Canada's immigration system at a high level since the 1990s. So the whistleblower from Canada Border Services Agency, Luc Sabourin, he worked in a national security vetting unit, essentially for the border agency, that was looking at compromised passports that are, lost or stolen worldwide. There are sometimes warehouses of passports go missing. They're picked up by transnational gangs, whether they're in Russia, the Middle East. Chinese-based triads sell these documents to bad actors worldwide, and this includes terrorists. So to get to the point here, Mr. Sabourin says he recognized in his unit that transnational crime appeared to have infiltrated CBSA systems, allegedly compromised CBSA workers, and they were using Canada's system to get dangerous actors, whether they be gangsters or terrorists, into Canada. And David, this is a problem I'd like to stress here. National security issues are really sovereignty issues, they're economic integrity issues, and these should not be political issues. These should be of concern to people that support democracies worldwide. And that's what I push forward with the Bureau. I'm not just listening to government talking points when they tell whistleblowers like Mr. Sabourin, nothing to see here. I'm digging deeper and getting nonpartisan views from bureaucrats that say, yes, there is something very bad to see here.
Well, it's interesting. I note that this is a Canadian, the CBSA. This is our border police, our border security. I've spoken to, in particular, members of the U.S. border who are also feeling the same tension and the same idea that they cannot get their information out. And a former deputy in charge, I've interviewed a number of times and spoken to a number of times, J.J. Carroll, who's been talking about the trafficking at the border. I have to be very careful how I phrase that in human beings. Certain words we can't say on YouTube. But he, of course, is doing a documentary. Do you think there's going to be more of the people in Canada, the CBSA, who are going to say, look, we know what's going on at this border. We know there are things that the government does not want the public to know. Do you expect other members of the CBSA to come forward and confirm this kind of activity that's going on?
Absolutely. Since I published that story with Mr. Sabourin, the whistleblower, I've heard from other people in CBSA that do say these concerns of transnational crime penetrating Canada's systems are real, they're present, and they present a threat at the United States' northern border. So if you think about it, we already hear from US politicians saying that they're going to need to tighten up their border with Canada. It's not just Mexico they're worried about. They don't want, unfortunately, terrorists that have been able to access Canada's systems to access the United States from the north. And you spoke about Mr. J.J. Carroll. I've interviewed him as well for some stories about the U.S. southern border. And absolutely, this doesn't need to be a politicized issue. This is an issue that really rise to the forefront with videos that were tweeted on the platform X. They were not covered by big mainstream media companies until CBS, the national broadcaster, really responded to some of those citizen videos, went down to the border where J.J. Carroll knows that Mexican cartels are working with Chinese triads to flood that border with sometimes gangsters, sometimes trafficked humans, a lot of drugs. And so CBS did follow the citizen journalists, and now more Americans know. Certainly there's a deep problem at the U.S. southern border.
And apparently there's a huge problem at our border as well. And of course, Justin Trudeau doesn't want to talk about that. When the revelations first came out about how much China was interfering in our electoral process, Trudeau went on the offensive, as he usually does, saying that this has been the only government that's actually taken this issue seriously. And as he says, we've rolled up our sleeves and we've acknowledged the challenges here, and we're doing all we can to stop this. Of course, it was utter nonsense. He's profited from Chinese electoral interference, and he certainly has done nothing to really stop it. I want to discuss something. I want to get to this because I know our viewers are saying, talk about the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, NSICOP, which we all heard for the first time, I think many people. Of course, David McGuinty, an Ottawa South MP, is the chairman of this committee. It's supposed to be it's a nonpartisan committee. Conservatives MPs are on this as well, and it's supposed to be taking a very unbiased, objective look at security in this country. So last June, they come out with a report, which Trudeau and I think selected cabinet ministers read in its unredacted form. Canadians saw the redacted form on the government website, which of course I read. And the report tantalizes readers with reports of at least 12 MPs that are wittingly accepted foreign influence, bribery perhaps, or gifts, but wittingly were prey to foreign influence, and China, of course, paramount among them. They also say possibly Russia, possibly Pakistan, but it's China. We all know that. There was some media pushback at the beginning in June, demands to know who are these MPs? Where are they? Are they in the governing party only? Are there Conservative MPs involved? Now we know Jagmeet Singh read the report and said he was very concerned about it, but didn't say why exactly. The so-called leader of the Green Party of two, Elizabeth May, said she read it and was relieved. No problem here. Clearly, there is a problem here. And as Parliament comes back this month, there will be a protest on the Monday they come back. I was informed when I was covering the Freedom Convoy trial. Somebody comes up to me and said, "Hey, please come to the protest on the Monday when Parliament resumes." And I said, "Which protest is that?" And she says, "We're going to be reminding Canadians that there are 12 MPs in the House of Commons who are potentially spying for a foreign country." And they said, "We think that story has been lost over the summer." I said at the beginning of the summer, I think that's a great concern for Canadians, that this story will be put under the carpet. We will not learn who these MPs are. The report will continue to be redacted for the public. Do you think we're going to get any answers on this, who these MPs are and what exactly they did to warrant mention in this report?
Well, the context here is my reporting previously for Global News is what forced NSICOP to have to respond and examine these allegations. It was, I reported at least 11 MPs, some witting, some not witting, allegedly were implicated in the Toronto area federal elections in 2019. Additionally, a large number of staff members allegedly working through China's United Front Work Department networks were implicated. And so now fast forward to NSICOP 2024, the redacted details say, indeed, some MPs and senators, by the way, are allegedly working for foreign governments. As you said, of course, China is paramount here. So what I need to stress is Canadians would know nothing about these allegations had I not reported for Global News. There are ongoing severe legal cases regarding my reporting and others, including the Globe and Mail, and Canadians will not know the details if some lawyers in Canada and perhaps even some courts in Canada have their way. But people can go to the Bureau where I continue to report on these issues, and I've named more names already. So they can read my reports, and I'm doing an updated chapter for Willful Blindness, my book that really started the ball rolling on these stories. That will be released in late September. Canadians will be able to learn deeper details, indeed details pointing to David McGuinty. His brother is the former premier of Ontario, who I argue in my book has a lot of connectivity to these problems that have now migrated to Justin Trudeau's office and staff. And David, I'll add this point. I could talk for an hour on this question, but Canadians, of course, need to know more about the details. And the Bureau, along with American media, just reported yesterday that the staff member of two New York state governors is now charged in New York, allegedly for changing the speeches of New York senior politicians to be against Taiwan. This staff member is charged with benefiting to the tune of millions of dollars. And David, the allegations that this woman, Linda Sun, is facing resemble exactly the details I have reported in a limited and lawful way about the election interference network in Toronto. But we have no charges in Canada. All we have is politicians with lawyers fighting back against the revelations that I brought to Canadians.
Yes, I was reading that article this morning, and of course, she worked for the notorious Andrew Cuomo, as well as the current governor. And this is absolutely shocking that this can continue. And it just seems these people think they can get away with this in secret and continue to do this. Wanted to touch briefly before I get into another issue, which is, of course, the Chinese police stations in Canada, which I'm sure you want to talk about as well. But philosophically speaking, you're an investigative journalist. I don't see a lot of investigative journalists on the horizon or actually working in media anymore. In fact, it's discouraged. Now, I used to be a public affairs officer in the Canadian Air Force, and it was my job to write the talking points. So I know where a lot of the skeletons are buried. Let's put it that way. And I used to write talking points about how great NATO was and its new advanced mission now that the Cold War is over. And I look at those talking points now and I say, how could I ever have written those things? But what amazes me is when I look at reporting today, the journalists, whether they're in Ottawa or they're in Washington, they are literally looking at the talking points coming from national defense, and the ones that I used to write in Canada, or coming from other government bureaucrats or agencies or departments. And they're just literally writing them down verbatim and passing this off as a news story. News releases used to be the beginning of the story. Well, yeah, that's where we start. That's the news. But let's fill in the gaps. Let's fill in the blanks because it's a lot of things the government doesn't want reporters to know. Reporters now instinctively believe the government is telling them all the truth, and they just print the news release and say that's all the news there is. Why have and I think, specifically, that interview recently with Kamala Harris in the United States, it was taped. It was not live. Kamala Harris could not do it live. She had to have her sidekick Tim Waltz with her throughout the interview, and he attempted to rescue her, though he's not exactly the best person to do that at times. The interview was edited afterwards, and then Dana Bash had the nerve to say this was just a wonderfully productive session. And I think, where are the Mike Wallaces of the world today who knew BS when they saw it? And whether it was coming from Republicans or Democrats, they knew government lies when they saw it. And they tended to distrust all politicians because politicians are in it for power. And I really don't care anymore what party they're with. We have to be suspicious of politicians' motives. And it's our duty as a journalist to question those motives, regardless of political party. And I remember talking to Seymour Hersh last year, about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline explosion. And of course, he was the only one at that time talking about the possibility that it might have been the United States who did it, even though they clearly warned that they would do it. And Seymour Hersh was talking about it. He was writing about it. Nobody else wanted to talk about it. And I thought, here's an investigative journalist who's still doing his job after 50 years, still on the beat, still on the job. Do you see a dearth of investigative reporting, Sam, in not just the United States, but in Canada?
There definitely is. There's a lot to chew on in the way you set up the question. Reporters like Seymour Hersh, I really don't agree with his take. I don't think he got Nord Stream right, but he is out there as an independent asking questions. He's throwing something into a gristle for the mill, and he may have got little shreds right, but his right to be an independent reporter and out there digging for facts is something that's crucial in today's world, because I will not even claim that I've got every story in my career 100% right, but I'm there as an independent investigator with deep curiosity and I would say doggedness, looking for facts that, as you say, too often, the press corps, whether it's in Washington or Ottawa, they've got a lot of pressure on them to churn out stories, and they are taking talking points. I think that when Ottawa's press corps looks at itself with regards to the Trudeau administration and sees where the Canadian population is now in terms of looking at really the scandals over the past 8 years, where was the press really on a lot of those stories? Where was the press on the Chinese interference story until I stepped up as a rather, I will call myself an outside reporter rather than an inside access to power reporter. That's what's important in independent investigative journalism, and a multiplicity of voices. And as you say, champions of the past like Mike Wallace were not going to take a guff and spin from politicians, military spin doctors, or officials. They were not going to say everything's a conspiracy, but they were going to test what the public is being sold and come out with their own take based on, wisdom and analysis. And back to the point of, what we're talking about, that's what I have to continue to do with Chinese interference, with the infiltration of Canada Border Services Agency. These are big stories, shocking, some of them hard to believe, but that's why, I've started a business to keep digging and pounding on these stories until, reportable truth can come out.
Well, that's exactly what we need, is something called reportable truth. And for those of you who just joined this broadcast, I'm talking to award-winning journalist Sam Cooper of the Bureau. Watch his material on Substack, read it. He's doing a tremendous job in exposing what needs to be exposed. Used to work for Global News and the National Post. He's an independent now, as I am largely. And I wanted to touch one more time on these 12 MPs before we go on to police stations. But do you think there's a general consensus in Ottawa, not just amongst the bureaucrats, but amongst all political parties, that they really don't want to pursue this any further? I didn't see the enthusiasm that I would have expected from Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. And I'm not I have no idea who these MPs are, by the way. I've received no inside intelligence from any of my contacts on Parliament Hill or the House of Commons about this. In fact, I don't even know if anyone outside the Prime Minister and a select few know who these names are. And I have no idea whether a Conservative is included in amongst these names. It would seem to me more logical to target government MPs, because you can get more from a government MP in terms of action and stated goals. But do you think there's a general lack of desire to follow this up in the fall here?
I think there 100% is a lack of desire and a lack of will. I'll make about 3 points here. One, I've reported on the NSICOP 2019 report. I'm the only journalist in Canada that has that unredacted report, which is really a precursor to this 2024 report that your viewers want to know more about. And look, I'll give you a few facts. The 2019 NSICOP report, as I've reported on the Bureau, says all three major Canadian parties have MPs and members that have been involved with foreign nations. What else does it say? I'll give you one shocking point I've reported on. It says a cabinet minister of a provincial government who was doing most of the work for their government on issues related to China provided political information to Chinese officials and, listen to this, this is a direct quote, and promised to attack any other MPPs that raised Chinese human rights abuse issues. Now, David, I believe I do know the name of that person. I've talked about legal threats, ongoing legal cases, so I won't be mentioning who I think is involved. But remember, this is a 2019 report for Justin Trudeau, read by Justin Trudeau. My question is, who is this politician, politically connected politician, likely from Ontario, and are they connected to Justin Trudeau? I'll leave it at that, but there's so many questions that Canadians need the answers for. And, to take my answer further, you're asking, do other party leaders want more to come out? Look, I can tell you this, former Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole was attacked by China. We now know that from the Hague Commission. It appears he was taken down from some elements within his party connected to China. And certainly the current leader, Pierre Poilievre, is not favored by China at all. He would appear to probably be China's worst concern. But a very senior Conservative Party member, my information from sources that have proved credible, was a member of the Toronto Election Interference Network. And I'll add this because I know you want to talk about Chinese police stations. I've reported recently from senior United States national security sources that they believe the command and control for Chinese triads laundering fentanyl proceeds for Mexican cartels through North American banks is based in Toronto. And I'm saying today, David, that Canada's government, none of these reports have come out with the facts that I know. that Chinese organized crime is at the center of this election interference story, and I believe supporting a number of the unidentified Canadian politicians that are colluding with China.
Wow, that is incredible. Toronto, the center of the narco industry, if you can call it that. They're the Chinese narco industry. Totally believable from the reports we saw about how incredibly pervasive the Chinese interference was in Toronto in terms of interfering in nominations of a Liberal MP, going after Chinese dissidents who are living in Canada, specifically ones in Toronto. We saw these reports. The Toronto area MPs being harassed, and of course, I think Polya probably wants to get to the bottom of this, but I think there's tremendous pressure from outside sources not to. And you have to remember the Conservative Party, much like the Republican Party in the States, is really two parties. There's the Make Canada Great Again segment represented by Pierre Polya. And there's the old Tory party, which really doesn't want any of this populism. It rejects populist policies. It rejects where Poilievre went with the Freedom Convoy. It rejects any sort of alliance with working class, ordinary Canadians. It wants to be the elitist party in Canada. It wants to be old Tory blue. So I think a lot of those forces are working against Poilievre very quietly. As long as he stays 20 points ahead of Justin Trudeau, they're going to keep their mouths shut. But I think there's inside pressure for him not to delve into this, because I think you have exactly stated what the problem is. There are probably conservatives involved, but not ones immediately surrounding Pierre Poilievre. And the embarrassment could be there simply because of the name. And that, I think, is really the nexus of the issue here. But I wanted to touch on the Chinese police stations. That's one issue that did seem to get into the media, and people did think that was a bit of an outrage, that we had Chinese police stations in Montreal, Vancouver, and Toronto that were actively going after Chinese dissidents, if you would, the diaspora who had come to Canada and who China deemed to be outlaws, essentially, that they still wanted to harass. And this has gone on in Australia too. Saw a fascinating Australia 60 Minutes report about how Chinese police stations were working in Canberra and Sydney in that country to actively harass and pursue Chinese dissidents who had emigrated to Australia. Same thing is happening in Canada. But of course, the government assured us through the former Justice Minister, or the public safety minister at the time, actually, who was now sitting in the back bench, that the problem was solved. We've shut these police stations down. Don't worry, folks. It's all over. Is that true, Sam?
Yeah, it's not true at all. And, to start my answer again, because often, these facts are hard for Canadians to believe, but this US government case I'm talking about, targeting the aid of two New York governors, says that the key factor here is Beijing's foreign influence arm, the United Front Work Department. And this arm is tasked to get into our diaspora communities, our Asian communities around the world, of people that many of them ran away from the authoritarian regime of the Chinese Communist Party. And yet this United Front is reaching into our democracies to chase them down and to intimidate them and to essentially, try to silence them. Xi Jinping is trying to protect his power, and that's what the Chinese police station story is all about. These community groups that could have been grassroots years ago have been taken over by Beijing's United Front Work Department and consulate officials in New York, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. And that is who is essentially giving the orders for these bricks and mortars Chinese police stations. And David, again, I harp on this point over and over again because I have to, because I'm the only Canadian journalist with full visibility and understanding that Chinese police stations, this is from senior, US intelligence, Canadian intelligence, my sources, these stations are run by Chinese organized crime that are involved in underground activities in our cities. And I'm telling you and your viewers, my information, which is credible, these Chinese police station gangsters are the key factor involved in the election interference funding scandals. So you see how this ties together. And so for Canada's former justice or public safety minister to say this is solved, he's a smart man. He knows it's not solved. He knows the RCMP has yet to issue a charge against these police station leaders who I'm saying are organized crime. And yet again, south of the border in New York State, we see cases piling up of the FBI going after a staff worker connected to these United Front networks, which I'm telling you are the central factor in the Chinese police stations. So Canadians, we're still waiting for justice. And most importantly, David, because I know many of my sources are from the Asian community in Canada, they're afraid. They're not being protected. They've been neglected for decades, while, as I've reported at the Bureau, previous administration, but most importantly and specifically Justin Trudeau's administration, were repeatedly warned about China's police station activities and did nothing, again, until media reports from myself and others brought this issue to the forefront.
Yes, and of course, the elusive name I was trying to come up, Marco Mendicino, who was the former public safety officer who was demoted, is sitting in the back benches right now, and but still maintains, of course, no problem here, folks, nothing to see. And but thank you for that update. I this is a clear and present danger to Canada, and I guess we'll close on this question here because CSIS whistleblowers really got this whole thing started, or at least one CSIS whistleblower got this whole investigation, limited media investigation, largely led by you,
Yes.
into Chinese election interference. And I think it was out of desperation, obviously, because people do not become whistleblowers in a whimsical act. It's a fateful decision, and if your name is ever released, it can be absolutely catastrophic. You may end your employment for life, and possibly, some kind of judicial penalties being involved, especially if it's a national security issue, whether you're in the military or CSIS or the RCMP or anything that pinges on national security. So I'm sure this individual did not do this lightly. And when we watched the hearings into Chinese election interference, the director of CSIS seemed to be quite frank in his assessment that Justin Trudeau doesn't take this very seriously. And he said that memos were not being read, but Justin Trudeau just understood the facts because he had told them so many times that Chinese interference in general, was a problem for Canada. Even though Justin Trudeau seemingly does not read reports, he does not read memos, he's too busy reading comic books. But this seems to me to indicate CSIS has its problems. There's no question about it. I disagree with some of its reports. But do you think there's a willingness for this security agency to investigate this further and to come up with some real facts that will actually be useful for Canadians?
Well, yeah, I can tell you factually, because I am the one that led this story. I am the one that accessed sources who had read my book, Willful Blindness, and understood that I knew the issues. People came to me and they were concerned, most specifically, that Justin Trudeau's administration was not responding to repeated warnings of deep Chinese interference touching all parties, but most specifically coming close to Justin Trudeau and his circle. That's the issue here. And nothing was happening. Remember, as I've told you, I've reported for the Bureau based on documents. Justin Trudeau was warned repeatedly about Chinese police activity. Nothing changed. The public knew nothing. Warned repeatedly about election interference. Justin Trudeau did nothing. The facts are this was covered up. And let me repeat again, we see very serious charges south of the border this week against a political staffer with access to governors. Could it be the case that political staffers with access to Justin Trudeau and influence are guilty of the same activity, but Justin Trudeau did nothing? We have a charge in the United States. We have nothing in Canada. In fact, as I'm saying, we have severe pushback against whistleblowers and reporters that took, the responsibility and bared the load of telling Canadians their democracy is under attack. And so that these are the facts here. There's a lot of danger for journalists in Canada. I'm going to be pushing forward with telling Canadians more about what they need to know. I do believe that many CSIS and RCMP officers want to see charges. They want the facts to come out. I've been told explicitly, people in Canada's government want my work to continue because it's doing good. People are talking and it's driving legal change. Not enough yet, but here's the problem. CSIS and the RCMP are politically controlled from the Prime Minister's office. That's the problem in a nutshell. We need reforms in Canada. We need new laws. Our democracy, our diaspora communities need to be protected. And I've written for the Bureau that we also need an independent anti-corruption agency, because I'll finish my answer to you like this, David. Again, the people that came forward to me said that very point. CSIS is not very good in investigating members of government in politically sensitive investigations because, again, CSIS gets political pressure from the top. So you see the Gordian knot there.
Yeah, well, I certainly do. And that's a problem they're experiencing in the United States as well. It's these agencies are tethered to the government of the day, and in the States to the president, in Canada to the Prime Minister's office. And that is something I think your reporting is beginning to have an adverse effect on, and we have to do that. My guest this morning has been Sam Cooper of the Bureau. Fantastic Substack. Read him, support his page on Substack. Sam, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And viewers, if you tuned in late, watch this interview from the beginning. There is some incredibly revelatory information here in terms of how bad the situation is. If you think the Chinese interference has been contained, think again, because we haven't put the lid on it. So, Sam Cooper, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure, and we'll certainly endeavor to have you on again to talk about this, because I know Canadians are concerned about this. I know Canadians think this is not the end of the story, because we have a hearing, we have some parliamentary committees looking at this. We have a lot of blather and bluster going on in the House of Commons, but is anything actually changing? So, and I think you said today, no, it's not really changing. So, thank you for your work, and please keep being the investigative journalist that this country lacks, because tremendous job, and reports you're coming out with. Literally, nobody else is covering this information. And I'm glad you took the route you did, because I'm not sure you could have kept doing this to the degree you are had you stayed with these other media outlets, which are not always willing to go all the way. But thank you, Sam, and thank you everybody for watching today. And please join us again tomorrow as we continue to give you all the news you need to know.